Odwe. Is Amanda Odwe. She works with the Center for Gender Research Advocacy and Documentation, which is based in the University of Cape Coast. Amanda will have 20 minutes to introduce her aspect of the topic that she's focusing on. After Amanda will be our second speaker, Jifa Tovike, who I'll introduce also when the time comes. So Amanda, without further ado, I'm going to put off my camera and mute myself, and the floor is yours. Thank you, comrade. Please take it away. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and a good afternoon to all of us present on this platform. As Jechi mentioned, this is a timely discussion because there are lots of cases that have come up looking at how women have been murdered over the last year, 2020 and 2021. And as he also rightly mentioned, until a net rights statement released 3 days ago, there hasn't been much attention given to it, apart from what appears in the media and the discussions that come off. But before I start, I would want to ask a question that which I think most can guide us as we think about it and why it's important for us to talk about issues of femicide at this point in time. So my first question is, if you woke up one day and found out that a woman has been murdered by her husband, what would come into your mind? What questions would you ask yourself? And most of the first question that comes into most people's mind is, maybe she was disrespectful, some of the responses we give ourselves, or she was listening to feminists and misbehaving. She didn't cook, she denied him sex and probably insulted her husband. If asked in the same situation, how would you feel if this happened to be your daughter, your sister, your friend, a cousin, or a lady very close to your heart? Whilst we think about this, I'm sure, and one thing that I'm so certain about is that a lot of people, and I can confidently say that a lot of people will say, no, this cannot happen to my daughter. This will not happen to my sister. I will not sit down and watch this happen. I will kill him if any guy tried to do that. But how did these women close to us become different from these strangers whose character we're questioning, whether they listened to feminists, whether they were disrespectful to these men? Can't your sister be disrespectful? If any, can't your cousin or somebody dear to your heart do the same things that came to mind when the other lady was mentioned? Also, what if you woke up one day and heard a man has been killed by his partner because he did not meet his expectations of a husband providing for the home? I'm sure a lot of people say, how dare she? Was it necessary? Couldn't she have worked to earn her own money? Why didn't she leave if he wasn't meeting her needs? Unfortunately, the questions you ask or you will ask when it comes to a woman killing her husband, why she didn't leave while she was staying, is one of the reasons why we're having increasing cases of femicide in Ghana. Over this year alone, about 25 women have been killed, some attempting to leave abusive relationships, some even being economically empowered is the reason why they are being killed. But the selective application of who has the right to do what and who cannot do is the reason why we are here. So I'm going to approach discussion from a gender-based violence perspective and how gender inequality and our patriarchal responses to some of these issues is leading to the perpetration of this form of violence. When we talk about femicide, it's basically looking at intentional killing of women and or girls, or misogynist killing of women by men based on the fact that they are women, and I will add that based on the fact that these men can kill them. And it takes diverse forms. It takes intimate femicide, which is mostly perpetrated by family members, intimate partners. And this form of femicide, even though it's mostly perpetrated by men, can also be done by women in some instances. Then we have non-intimate, which is a stranger forms of femicide. Over last year, over 6 cases of women murdered by total strangers. We wake up and then we hear they were found on the streets killed. But an intimate form of femicide is what has been on the increase this year. Partners killing, boyfriends killing their girlfriends, husbands killing their wives. Then we have the sexual femicide, where people kill these women, have sex with them before they kill them. An accidental femicide, where women engage in some form of, maybe they intervene in a situation and they are killed. In as much as these ones can occur in isolation, most often they come in tandem. Somebody sleeps with a person and kills them, and maybe an intimate partner or a total stranger, or it could be an accidental femicide by a partner. But these ones that we are going to talk about today have not been one of these are continuous. And the fact that it's gender-based is the reason why I would like to situate my argument within the gender-based violence. And I want to talk about gender-based violence. It looks at structural inequalities and ways in which the existing structures of our society perpetuate or allow some system of repression through which men have always maintained their power and control. And we realize from these cases that are coming up that the men's desire and readiness to maintain their power is why we are experiencing violence. So what kind of training are we giving our men in Ghana? What kind of messaging are we putting across? And what are the reasons for which these men are not able to maintain this form of messaging? When we talk about masculinity, which is the traditional expectations of men, our messages have always been around men being able to control their women and having total liberty to do whatever it is that they want. So the normalization of violence against women is one of the reasons for which violence is, femicide is happening in Ghana currently. The question I asked, if you had a woman being killed, what are the questions you ask? As soon as you ask these questions, you're telling us that it is right for a man to beat his wife. It is right for a man to hit a woman, whichever form or whatever way that it's accepted. And then our culture that says that men should be able to discipline women. And this vague concept of discipline and why and how men can in their own way situate the kinds of discipline they think they can give in is one of the reasons. And when these happen, what do? Do we justify them? And if we're justifying them, who is justifying these acts? Every member of society almost every member of society seems to justify men's use of discipline when in their marital relationships and in any form of intimate partner relationships that they have. And this has led to some tolerated impunity of perpetrators' actions against these women because they can do it, because I can do it, because society will permit me, because they will ask these questions and blame the victim, blame the dead person, blame this woman. I can go ahead and do it. And it's been eased into the situation where institutional structures that are supposed to ensure that there's protection for these women also perpetuates this messaging. My personal experience of going to DOFSU to collect data on gender-based violence. Just as I entered the entrance of the DOFSU headquarters, the first thing I was asked is, your husband beat you? And I was like, no, I just came here to collect data. But find yourself in this situation and put yourself into the shoes of a woman who is being abused and who is going to seek help. How will she feel if she's asked this question? What kind of support do you think she thinks she will get when she gets there? And how will this affect her ability to be able to engage the structures to protect her and give her the justice that she is required? And when we talk about gender-based violence, most people think that we just want to protect women from getting beaten and all, but some of these end result, the extreme ends of gender-based violence leading to death and the consequences this has for society is some of the issues for which we have to consider and know that it's important that we address it. What's the culture we have around gender-based violence? The culture of silence. And this is posing a great threat for women and is also leading to acceptance of femicide. Ever since these cases came up, what has this, the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection done about this? Has there been a statement? What is their response so far? The police always tells us something is being done about it. But since last year that we started hearing that women are being killed, there's nothing. And so with this culture of silence, it gives a space for people to believe that when I do it, I can get away with it. The delay in the structures that will ensure that there's some level of speed in addressing these issues, which can serve as a deterrent, is not happening. And so then people can also go ahead and say that, okay, if I do it, there's nothing that can be done. And the next question is, how do we see women in society? Do we see them as people with equal rights? No, most of it's very obvious that we don't really see them as having equal rights, because then when you find if a woman is supposed to be in the position of the man who is killing right now, then the way we will treat it might be different. If we woke up one day and found out that 25 men have been killed by their wives in 1 year alone, what will be our response? Are we going to stay back? Are we going to treat it the same way that we are treating this now? And if we are not going to, then what is different about them? Why is it that when it's a man, it's more likely to be different? And why do we think that when it's women, it doesn't matter? Most of the thing, it's just because we think that women do not contribute as much as men will in society, economically, and a whole lot. And because of that, we don't think that it's important that we attach that level of importance to what happens to women. But one thing I would want us to understand is that whatever is happening now has a rippling effect that affects every part of society. These women that are being killed cuts across different classes, economic background. These are workers. And so there are losses to institutions, there are losses to families, economic cost that comes with gender-based violence, addressing gender-based violence issues in society are all we have to consider. What is the losses that we are going to experience in the next few years if we don't halt this and if we let it continue? What is the cost to families, the larger society? And then what are the legal provisions that will require is the next question that I would want us to ask. What should we do? Most of the time we think that if we have laws is enough, but then it has shown that we have the the Domestic Violence Act. We have it, but it's not happening. So what we need to do is to move a step further. What is it that we are supposed to do? Who is supposed to act? There is bystander intervention. You can report these cases on our behalf. Ever since the media took it up and the police is saying that something has been done, what are other institutions that are important to these structures doing to ensure that these women are covered and protected for? And most of the people will say, oh, it's because, okay, in this context, a lot of people are raising issues that, oh, maybe it's because of COVID. There are psychosocial problems that people are facing. In as much as this may be true, this is where I have my reservations, because then there are a lot of people going through psychological issues. Why are all not men killing? My research on masculinity is pointing to the fact that we are selective of what messages we get, and the messaging we are giving men in society, you can beat, you can hate whoever it is one of the reasons. So who are those taking those messages is what we have to look at. Let's look beyond the pathological behavior, the psychological issues, and look at how are the structures we're having in place, giving room for these people to think through this and choose them. People choose which messages. So if your wife raises her voice at you, this is what you can do. If you're a man, you have to stamp your authority in the house. The woman cannot say she's walking away and she gets hurt. And these are some of the messaging that is leading to this. So how are we going to ensure that there's a change in the messaging that we are given? One thing I'm also observing from all this is the fact that we always talk about the fact that economic empowerment liberates women to be able to leave abusive homes. But some of the reasons that we are getting for these deaths or these murders is the fact that these women are economically empowered. And some men are given the excuse that because they have money, because they take decisions in the house, and that is why they feel they can do whatever it is. And in their attempts to establish their masculine capital, which is a way of using violence to establish their perceived lost position at home, is why they are killing. So what kind of messages do we need now to be able to bring to society? So if a woman becomes empowered and she can do this, as a man, is your identity all wrapped around your ability to establish authority in the house? Is it all built around the ability to use violence to reinstate your authority? There's a need for us to be able to find solutions to that. There's a need for us to question all these things that are happening in society. Where do we situate our messaging and our arguments? How do we make sure that women, the rights that women deserve are given them in accessing legal structures, in accessing all forms of societal institutions that they need? How are we going to make men understand the fact that your manliness or your ability to be a man is not built around the toxicity of being the sole provider, and that when your woman or your wife is able to provide for the home, it does not make you less of a man? How are we going to make families understand that if your daughter does not want a certain relationship anymore, you do not force her to stay in it? One of the cases that was in Volta region, it was just even a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. The abuse had started the year before, and this lady had said she didn't want a relationship anymore. The guy had even told the mother that if the daughter doesn't change, he's going to kill her. No one did anything about it. They watched on until this man killed the daughter. What is it that we're going to do if you hear such cases? How do we ensure that we as members of society at the first level try to provide some level of protection for these women before it gets to the extreme? How are we going to make sure that when it gets to the public space, we are not going to blame the women for what is happening, but make men accountable for some of these actions that they are taking, which is leading to loss of lives? There are children that have lost mothers, there are homes that have lost breadwinners at this point in time. And then as a country, we have lost people that are productive to the survival of our institutions and our home. And finally, what I would want to ask is, if we're given the opportunity to reverse everything that we are doing now, what is that we are going to do different? Are we going, what is it that we are going to tackle? How do we ensure or make ourselves know that these persons that are in these institutions are equally members of the society? So the messaging that we are hearing are coming into the workspaces. How do we train those in the paralegal systems to address and deal with their biases so that we will ensure that there's justice, fair justice given to each and everyone that deserves it? I think I'll end my discussions here, and then if we have any other questions, then we continue with it later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I'm going to mute you. Oh yeah, you muted yourself. How civilized of you. Thank you very much. And I think Amanda has raised some important questions. She's affirmed that indeed there is this prevalence of discrimination against women, which very often is spills over or is enforced by violence. She points to the fact that part of this is an expression of what she called the power that men have. Now that in itself, analytically or otherwise politically raises a great many issues. If indeed men have power and therefore have a relative privilege, then how do you resolve the problem? I'm not going to give up my power if it is genuine power, so to speak, unless it's in the service of something, a bigger gain or something like that. Those are questions that we may want to, we may look into some more. She's also referred to the fact that, the prevalent ideas are also very important. Where those ideas come from ought to be something that perhaps we ought to talk about. And then lastly, she's talked about the institutions, the law, the legal regime, and so on and so forth, and how they, in fact, institutionalize and perpetuate this, discrimination against women across the system, and which leads to the devaluation of the implications of violence, among other things. So thank you very much, Amanda. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions and comments, based on the introductory remarks that you've made. I'll now hand over to our second speaker, who's Jifa Tovike. Jifa works with Feminist Africa. She's also at the University of Ghana. And for purposes of today, Jifa is also a member of the Socialist Students and Workers Network and the ISO as well. So Jifa, comrade, floor is yours. If you can unmute, and then you have 20 minutes similar to Amanda. Thanks, Jifa.
Thank you, Jechi. And thanks, Amanda, for saying everything that I wanted to say. Okay, so about 21 years ago, here in Ghana, we have been confronted with the murder of women. They call it the ritual killings of women in Ghana. I'm looking at the Guardian newspaper right now, Sunday, 26th November 2000. Fear grips Ghana as ritual killers claim the 34th victim. The BBC reports fury over women's killings in Ghana. The CNN reports women serial murder toll in Ghana, Ghana capital tops 30. So I think many of you are familiar with this story of the killing of women. So one of the reports, for instance, in the Guardian newspapers highlighted some of the key things that we are talking about. It said all the victims have been women found stripped from the waist down with their legs apart. In many cases, unused condoms have been scattered around, and some of the women had their genitals mutilated. Sometimes empty syringes were left at the scene. Cross-examination of some victims revealed pink pricks where some of their blood had been removed. So that is the story. So we know these killings in Accra and many other parts of Ghana in 1999-2000 galvanized women in this country to forge a way forward, to put pressure on the states to act, etc. So why are we talking about this 21 years later? A different kinds of murder is happening. The first one, we've seen that there were murders on the streets or wherever. This one, the murders are in the homes. So not to go on with the structure of the story in the past, but to come to the present. So the question I'm asking is that, how do we understand women femicide within the framework of oppression and inequality, not only in Ghana, but in the wider framework of inequality and oppression, and women's oppression for that matter. So I will talk about oppression briefly. So when we say oppression, a women's oppression, what exactly is oppression? So we know that oppression is mainly a discrimination, a kind of discrimination against people or an individual because we perceive them to be a certain kind. And this kind of discrimination gives you the right to treat them, to maltreat them, or to treat them differently, and to justify that treatment based on that prejudice that you have. So oppression itself is seen in many ways, and it expresses itself in both. It has material roots, it has consequences, and it can be seen in many ways. It can be in the form of domestic violence. You can see it in the form of mass murder of women or other minorities, sexual minorities. It can be ethnic and all sorts of other kinds of difference. Okay, so you see that when that kind of oppression, when that people perceive you to be that, and you are suffering that kind of discrimination, society now, you are inherently demonized. So your for instance, if you die, it doesn't even cause uproar, because the system has made it such that your death is supposed to be normal, and it only takes people who want to talk about it to raise the issue for some to see the problem. So that's how we see oppression, and oppression can happen in different forms, as I've said, but different classes of people suffer different kinds of oppression. So like Amanda has said, the murder of women in Ghana, when you see the statistics that we have compiled by NetRight, you see that different classes of women are suffering this kind of oppression, okay, in the home. So what is the roots of this kind of oppression? What's the root of women's oppression? So we come back to the core roots of capitalism and its production logic. So capitalism works in a way that it tries to control both what happened in the home and also at the workplace. So, for instance, women's the family, for instance, advances capitalism in a way that, for instance, let's talk about bring it home. So in Ghana, if a cocoa farmer who has toiled for 1 year gets a certain low pay or low remuneration for the cocoa that he sells to governments, and governments also sell to the global market, okay? If the cocoa, that household is not able to reproduce itself, who takes that burden? Is usually the women who will take that burden. So the fact is that woman is subsidizing capital in a way. So by women's own work, the care work in the family, the work in the family's enterprise, whether in farms or whatever, subsidizing capital. So capitalism has that interest to keep women down. So it's not inherently men themselves who want to keep women down. That's the first thing I'm getting from the structure of capitalism in society. But capital exploits both the man and the woman. But because of the hierarchies we have, women are now at the bottom. So this expresses itself in different ways. So we'll see very soon. And about 26 women who are murdered in Ghana, we are using them as an entry point to discuss the women's oppression and then the inequalities that we are suffering in the country. So I want to also bring our mind to another kind of femicide, which is silent but is happening. About the number of women who die from abortion in Ghana, for instance. So why is this an important case? So there's this study by Police and Co. who looked at the data from Ghana to estimate approximately that 200,000 abortions occurred in Ghana in 2017. Okay, and this is the rate is 26.8%, which means that the women between 15 and 49 women in that category had abortions. And this also came with deaths, okay? So these ones are not reported. They are not reported because we don't see them as part of the systemic violence against women and leading to the issue about their body autonomy. And we know that in Ghana, abortion is illegal unless in peculiar cases it's medical or something like that. So this is one statistic is grim. So the issue about the women's the body autonomy of women, the commodification of the identification of women, which itself is an outcome of what capitalism is. So for instance, in our media, we project women in a very commodified and objectified way. So in that, when you are socialized that way, you don't see the importance of that person that you are. So that person, in a way, is suffering that kind of oppression, which is already in the system. So it becomes systemic and also structural. So we see these things happening also in other ways. So for instance, commercial sex workers in Ghana, who are every day are harassed by the state machinery, by others. It's also another way of suppressing women's bodily autonomy. So that's another way to think about it. Rape, which I don't have the statistics here, but is very high, is another way of women suffering this kind of oppression because they are women. So why is this an important thing? Why would this happen? And why is the family at the center of this? So I've already stated that the family is central to the organization of society itself, and so what the family serves the interest of capital. And men, because of the structure of the family, men are to conform to an ideal image of a breadwinner. So for instance, when there's even economic crisis, a man is supposed to be positioning himself as if, or as the breadwinner, even if he can't. If already the structure of the society doesn't.
Abigail speaking the local language.
Okay.
Sorry,
yes. So we see the men themselves also suffering this kind of suffering from capitalist logic of production. So it's not only women. Men also suffer. But then we see that in the class society, some men who suffer some of these differences. So we ask ourselves, why is this important now? Last year I was helping Professor Tekwa Menu on a project, and it's about domestic violence. And you can see clearly why some of these things may be happening at this time. So a woman, for instance, said, talking to Dopsu, a woman came to report the husband for abuse. And what's the story? The story is that, okay, so he was Okada operator, and because of the restrictions on movement, he has to stop the operation. And so he accused the wife of giving him less fish than he usually was eating prior to COVID. And he said that because of that, the woman is disrespectful. And so the beating happened and the woman was injured. So that comes back to the issue about women's role in the family, that because women take this role of social reproduction, if you are not able to do that, you are also in trouble. So in one of the stories, for instance, the killing, it's about the man not being served the food. And so he went for a machete and cut the woman into pieces. And we have other stories like that in the murder story. So it relates to women's role in the household as people who are very who take that place, and because capital and even the state benefit from the oppression of women in that way. So if you're not able to do that, then you are in trouble and you are murdered. So women's oppression remains a central part of society. We should remember that. And now we should also remember that because of women's double burden of you doing both reproductive and productive work and the time constraints, if you are not able to do all this, you are also in trouble. You could be beaten, and then you could be killed in this case. And so we have to know that we need not to concentrate oppression on an individual man, but of the system that produces the men we are talking about. And that system is what we are talking about, that a system, that capitalist system that operates in cahoots with the states to make men what they are acting now. So if the state, for instance, doesn't take responsibility for the murders and the things that we are talking about, silence, what does it mean? That doesn't mean we are talking to somebody who is an accomplice in this case, because the state is a benefit from what is happening in the home. So the issue about concentrating the struggle on men will fragment the fight. It is rather for us to overthrow the system that creates the men. Otherwise, like I'm saying, we have come back 20 years to discuss this same issue, which is it means that it is continuing, and it will be worse. Elsewhere, and of course in Ghana, we also know that when there's economic crisis or socio-economic crisis, it's women and migrants and other minorities that suffer from a lot of oppression from this. So the question we ask is that, how do we deal with this? Will more laws prevent this thing? No. From my reading, more funding of police, the more you fund the police, the more the funding is rather used against women. And the more you give apparatus to check a certain kind of crime, the more that is also used against women. So what we need to do is rather to change a system that produces the variant. Not we're talking about preventive. We want to cure it, but we also talk about prevention. Both of them are very important. But then it's to tackle the system in a socialist way, to make sure that wealth is distributed equitably, and that the kinds of things that put women under men in a way that creates this hierarchy that causes that affects women's production, autonomy, body autonomy, and the kind of things they can do, whether you decide to stay in a marriage or not, whether you want to go with that man that you don't like or not, depend very much on how we frame the question. Because if we frame the question as a moral question, it will not stop, and we'll come back 20 years to discuss this. It's a question, it's both a political question, a question to tackle the structure of capitalism, the structure of the state in relation to what it does with women, and then the structure of the issues about the family, how the family is affected by what happens in the wider economy. So I suggest, I'm still talking about the issue about looking at if you look at setting the class as a source of oppression, we can also look at it as a source of collective strength. So we can use the current movement, use the tools that we have to start talking about the kinds of things that can and will advance a better society. And I will end by saying that all of us here we have duty. We are all supposed to be part of the struggle. But I know that because of where we all stand politically, our understanding of the situation is diverse. So there are people who talk about it as moral questions. So people say, oh, may God forgive us. May God punish them. That alone will not solve the problem. It's for us to get to know that the men themselves are also suffering from the kind of oppression we are looking at, and the kind of inequality happening. So currently, in Ghana, what statistics have shown that poverty, for instance, is reducing since 1990s. We have also seen that inequality is widening. So how is that possible? How is it possible that we are reducing the number of poor people, but yet some people are getting more, too much, than others? So these are some of the things we have to question, and we have to continue the struggle to make the positions very unified. We need to have a unified front, not a fragmented one, to discuss the systemic oppression of women and also some men. Because when men are oppressed, women also take that bullet. And as somebody said, the more women are liberated, the more men are also liberated. So thank you very much, Echi.
Thank you very much, Jifa. And thanks for stopping just at the time I was about to harass you to stop. So thank you very much. I think that your presentation was very well, complemented very well what Amanda had said. Amanda gave us an important focus on the responsibilities of individual men as perpetrators of some of the horrors that we've seen. And I think that Jifa added to that the dimension about the society in which we live in general, the fact that women are subordinated not simply by individual men, but primarily by a system that actually benefits from the way in which they subsidize, by performing all kinds of work at home that nobody pays for, and they are able for that reason, and so on. And both capital, that is the social relationship that ensures that there's a group of people, a small minority of people at the top of society, which can extract, surpluses and accumulate wealth from all of us. They are the chief beneficiaries, and that the state that exists to ensure that this capitalist system continues smoothly, even if it occasionally intervenes to ensure that things do not go into excess. That state has a conjoined vested interest in the whole arrangement, and that's why it is also an instrument in the discrimination of women. So I thought the two presentations, complemented each other very well indeed. So we'll now open the floor for questions, comments, so on. I think that if you want to speak, where do you even indicate? Sorry, I can't find where. There's supposed to be some electronic hand somewhere, but I can't find it. Does anyone?
You go to reaction. When you click on reaction, you will see raise hand.
Yes, okay. So if comrades can do that, can indicate, and then I'll call you in 10. Please let me remind you, you have a maximum of 3 minutes to contribute, and then you know, at some we'll try not to make a direct question and answer session so that the discussion can flow. Anyone can come in on any point at all. And at the end, we'll ask Amanda and Jifa back. If, however, before that, we think we want to bring them back as well, we'll continue to do that. So we'll do that as well. So the floor is now open to all those who wish to speak. Please indicate, and let's, yeah. Okay. George Powell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Comrade. And I want to thank our two sisters for the splendid presentations they have made. Mine is just a little comment, and I think that the dominance of male in society is actually based on religious and cultural beliefs. Nevertheless, this doesn't in any way mean or give anyone the right to take away the life of another person. So I mean, especially so for reason of divergence of views. In any case, whatever they take it to be. And I think the way to go is to continue to do advocacy and awareness raising like we are doing here now on national scene in the media, be it by electronic or print media, because I feel strongly that this is based on ignorance, and some people just have that egoism to carry on what they are doing, and it is not really sanctioned by society as we may think, because you can see the number of women domestic violence against women compared to homes where there are no domestic violence. You can see that we all live in the same society, and this is not really what society supports. Only that enough awareness needs to be carried out, just as we have been doing FGM in the past 20, 30 years, and we can see the kind of changes that is taking place right now with respect to this situation with FGM. So I think we need to do more awareness raising on this particular issue, not just leaving it as people think it is nothing to talk about. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you, George. Any other comments, contributions from anyone? Nanama, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks to both speakers for giving us a background and insight into what is happening and how society plays a role in this. I just wanted to add that you'll find that quite a number of women also do share some of the sentiments of larger society, as in when you, like Amanda first said, when you hear that a woman has been murdered or something, the first question they ask is, what did she do? Was she disrespectful? And so on. And you'll find quite a lot of women also making excuse. Oh, she shouldn't have done that. Maybe if she hadn't done that, he wouldn't have beaten her and the rest. So you realize that society, both men and women, need to be taught, need to be, our mindset needs to be redirected for us to know that not preparing food on time is no excuse to beat someone to death. Not having washed your clothes is no excuse. If somebody no longer wants to be in a relationship with you, that is no excuse to kill the person. So I think the larger society, and we can also start with our girls, our young girls, for them to have this mindset that it is not okay. Don't take it as okay because our mothers before did. It's time to have a reset of how we think. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nanama. Anyone else? I think the first two contributions, both George and Nanama, have gone back to reaffirm the thing about attitudes and ideas, the power of ideas, and the attitudes that we inherit, and so on and so forth. So just to mark that, in case people want to broaden or engage with that dimension as well. Of course, those are important, but there may be other things to say. Faisal, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, comrade. And thanks to Amanda and Jifa for for their input. Two quick things. The first relates to the question of culture. You know, Nama raised an important question about our culture. I think it's important to realize that culture is not independent of power relations. Whereas what we often call our cultural people in their place. And that's coupled with a society, an economic system, as everybody who has spoken before me has described, that is premised on making profit for a few people, means that important socially necessary functions like social reproduction, you know, that has to be paid for by these handful of people who make the majority of wealth in society, is devolved to the level of families, and women become the bearers of these responsibilities. So culture therefore becomes the cloak, you know, to ideologize this exploitation out of vision. So really, it's important, as Manama has said, that we think carefully about culture. And now I want to come to the point of what do we do going forward. I think the gender question is really not independent of the way in which society is structured based on those who have and those who do not have. So women happen to be at the lower ranks of society, at least the majority of women. I mean, women are a differentiated group, but at least the majority of women happen to be at the lower ranks of society. They barely have many to make. So,
Faisal, you're breaking up. Oh. Is there any way to reposition yourself?
Question for me here, say, hello, Baz.
Yeah, sorry, we can't hear you.
My net, okay, I think my network is bad. I will just proceed. My network is bad.
Okay, then type it into the chat. Okay,
yeah. Sure,
type it into the chat as well as others are doing. Okay, because we want you to finish the point you're making. Any other speakers?
Sure, thanks.
Okay. While we're waiting for the next person, let me read one of the and Nanama wants to come back, but before I call her, let me read something in the chat from Ikria, which says, patriarchy predates capitalism and femicide occurred in pre-capitalist societies. In fact, some cultures still uphold femicide, like honor killings, stoning women for adultery from cultures developed in feudal societies. What will be different under socialism that will ensure the dismantling of patriarchy with an automatic disappearance of femicide? So that's a very important question, which any of us can answer. And also when our two speakers come back, they can take up as well. So any other contributions? There's a very worrying reluctance to, because this is, I mean, obviously it's not a simple topic for a lot of people. I think one of the things that Amanda and other speakers have shown is how deeply ingrained attitudes are on this question. So it's a fairly complicated thing. I could imagine when Jifa was mentioning things like abortion, some people probably about to, get a heart attack or whatever it is. But, whatever complexity that we face, an honest appraisal, an honest assessment is necessary if we are to make sense of things. And more importantly, having made sense of things, to use that understanding to improve things. So, I mean, the complexity of life, we didn't create it, but we can't run away from it if we're serious about contributing to, better conditions for women and a better life for all of us. So that's the way it is. So any contributions? If not, I will abuse my position and take it upon myself to begin to respond to part of what Ikria was saying in the chat. And as I said, she's talking about the fact that patriarchy, that is the power of men over women, and in a sense rule of men, so to speak, broadly speaking, predates capitalism, and femicide occurs in pre-capitalist societies. So basically, and there's relics of that continuing in terms of honor killing. Somebody mentioned human genital mutilation, all those kind of things, and what would be different under socialism, and will there be an automatic disappearance of femicide? Obviously, I have never lived under socialism, so I can't say with any degree of absolute certainty what will happen under socialism. Moreover, I think that under socialism, when different generations of people develop under conditions where, for example, the economic factor is not central to the way in which women are imprisoned in relationships that they don't want to, and the economic factor is not central to the way it affords men a mechanism for exercising control over women, then their whole morality, their whole public opinion will change. I think that is something that, yeah. But as for the future, I think that one of the ways in which we can begin to think about Ekwe's question, at least certainly from my point of view, is to look at it. What does it mean? What do socialists have to say about addressing one, that there is the subordination of women, the oppression of women, long predates capitalism, because obviously for socialists, the key thing that they talk about is that the key fault line in society today, in modern society, is the fault line between those who appropriate wealth from the exploitation of the majority of people's labor. So in other words, it is between capital and all the different sections of the laboring classes, whether they're in the informal sector or the formal sector, whether they're in the rural economy, whether they're in the urban economy, and so on and so forth. The whole range, the whole gamut of people. So for example, if you own a financial platform such as digital finance, you don't discriminate whether you are taking money and extortionate fees from a household, remitting money from each other, or from workers, and so you go ahead and do it anyway. It's a very wide ambit and an increasing ambit from which capitalists can draw surpluses and so on. But it's an important question, because you see, the central emphasis that socialists give to the question of labor and capital, labor in the broad sense, and capital, means that we see that that's one of the reasons why we think there ought to be a possibility, and there is indeed a possibility of uniting the majority of people who in one way or the other are people who produce surplus value to be exploited or appropriated by the ruling class. It is that material condition that actually provides us with an objective basis. But an objective basis does not guarantee that it will be realized, because many other objective consequences, including the ongoing experience of exploitation, the ongoing experience of oppression. And by the way, one of the most powerful effects of oppression is the division that it causes. Okay, so whether it's between ethnic groups, religious groups, race, women, different sexualities, and so on and so forth, gender, and so that is one. In fact, the whole function of oppression, I think, essentially is to divide a majority of people. But the fact, though, is this: that capitalism, whichever way it is also a historical system, and it is a historical system which is simply to say this is the modern contemporary form of class society. So, if indeed there has been patriarchy before capitalism, I think that the answer lies in the fact that patriarchy has existed in all class societies, not in all human societies, in all class societies. I think there's an important distinction. And just to take a minute to kind of indicate why I think so, I won't have enough time to go into everything. If we take the majority of human existence, about 90 to 95% of the period that human beings have existed on Earth, they have been organized as hunter-gatherers in what are called band societies, small groups of people where the population is regulated, where you have to have enough access to water, to plants that you can pick, to hunting, and so on and so forth, and where the contribution of everybody is absolutely vital to the sustenance of everybody else. Okay, so there's no real private property. There's no, this is my wife, this is my child. There is no, basically, you have to live communistically and communally, otherwise you won't survive. A society like that also would have a different morality. So for example, it will have to regulate the population that it has. So women giving birth has to be regulated. That means women themselves have to have a choice as to when they give birth or not. And that choice has to dovetail with the needs and capacities of the society to absorb them. Or if you're old beyond some point and you cannot be a productive member from the point of view of, let's say, contributing to the welfare of the, you go off, your contribution is to go off and die so that you ease the burden for the rest of everybody else. And the highest nobility, in fact, ancestor worship came from that these are people who assured the continuation and continuity of our line and our band precisely because of the enormous sacrifices that they made throughout their lives when they were active, and even more so at the time that they felt that their presence. So a different morality and all those things exist. Once you move from those band societies to societies that become, for example, agricultural societies that become a lot more settled, By settled, it means that now you can't, you are able to produce to sustain yourself. So let's say that includes the domestication of animals, agriculture, and so on and so forth. Once you have a settled population like that, actually, the position of women and their biological capacity to give birth changes. It changes on the one hand, because now you need more people and more hands to be able to engage in that agricultural production. And that agricultural production yields a surplus over and above what everybody, I'm not saying everybody is full and have all they need, but there will be a surplus over and above what the society as a whole needs for its immediate survival. That surplus may still not be enough to cater equally for everybody in to the same degree and same style. So regulatory authorities emerge, those who say plant at this time, or so that if you notice, the first authorities in those situations were those who used to take care of the stocks of food of those communities. And they used to enshrine all kinds of things around that, including gods. And so temples and god and high priests were the first, if you like, people who didn't necessarily have to work like everybody else, but assumed functional roles of superintending about the common needs of society and using that to entrench that position. Once you have a surplus, a number of things happen. One is that you can trade with another group because you have something to trade. Second is that you can go to war because you can seize what somebody does not have. In other words, the population growth also means that you have the fact of trade, the fact of war, means that the role of men, those who enhance the position of the group by their external activities, who can go for longer, because right now there's a greater emphasis on women giving birth, and now there's a greater emphasis on external exchanges and external relationships, which actually can yield more wealth for the group as a whole, and greater prestige attached to those things. And differentiation begins to arise. This is when Engels, the chief collaborator and comrade of Karl Marx, says that the rise of class society is the world historic defeat of women. So if after that, the beginnings of those early class society, we've had increasingly intensification of the exploitation of women and their subordination, it is because that simple biological role has been transformed, one, into a social role, which is that you have to give birth. Your main role is to give birth to, so that even till today, if you're a woman who don't have children, you're not married, you are seen as somehow, less than somebody else. You're not even a full woman, so to speak. Okay, to cut a long story short, if today capitalism is the modern form of, then since we cannot be abstract about it, since we are against class society, including all the historic wrongs that women have suffered, we correct it in the class society that we live in. We can't go back and correct the wrongs of slavery because we don't live in slavery. This is the society that we have to deal with. But the society that we have to deal with has a feature which is different from all the other previous class societies, which is this, that most class societies arose precisely because, yes, surpluses were produced, but it was never enough for everybody to live a certain life. Under capitalism, we know, at least certainly for the last 100, 200 years, there has been enough wealth in the world for everybody to have decent meals, a decent roof over their head. And so it is the social relations, the political relations about who governs the economy, who gains from it, and so on and so forth. That is why things that we were unheard of in our society, even only 100 years ago, like mass unemployment. Who would have thought, if you read a book like Okonkwo, Things Fall Apart, could there be unemployment? Of course not. It is the fact that the wealth, the most important wealth creation mechanisms in society and relationships and processes in society are increasingly under the domination of a minority, and that the whole society will pay for the thriving and the health of those mechanisms. And even if you cannot contribute to it, you are better off becoming unemployed. If you are unemployed, you are exerting pressure on those who are employed because you are a reserve army of labor. So the capitalism thrives on fundamentally on what? Unpaid labor. Unpaid labor in the sense that it exploits surplus value from everybody. It is there that we understand the double burden of women. Because in addition to the unpaid labor that all working people yield in the sphere of the economy, women also yield this even more pronounced unpaid labor in the private domesticity of their homes, in this long-standing class-oriented subordination of women and this emphasis on their social reproduction where they have no control. This is where elements like what Jifa is talking about the bodily autonomy of women, women's choice, as we had in the early part of human history, women's choice as to when to give birth or not, women's choice as to who they want to be with. It is absolutely central. This is the key reason why women are not prominent in politics, in public life, and so on. So it is that domestic burden that they carry. It is the key reason why even in a socialist network like ours, there's always only a minority of women. It is also a key reason why we must have a radical interest in altering that pattern. If we have a radical interest in altering that pattern, then all those shibboleths which confine women, because there's a material basis for it, which is what I'm arguing about this intensified unpaid labor. But I've also shown that unpaid labor is the condition that afflicts an overwhelming majority of people anyway. So there is that objective basis for that kind of unity. And one form of unpaid labor or cheap labor devalues the labor of all labor. So again, they ought to be, but it does not come automatically. And that's why the emphasis that people have given on ideas and so are important. So those who have a critique of class society, those who have a critique of the current class society, and the most comprehensive critique at that, which is what revolutionary socialists, Marxists, and socialists do, are very quite likely to be able to not simply to be feminist and want women's liberation, but are quite likely keen about the, overthrowing the shackles that women have. And that is why if you look in the last 100 years again, at every stage, it is when socialists and the workers have brought the women's question into the heart of the workers' movement as a whole. And the workers' movement, by which I simply mean the organized section of all this labor from which unpaid labor talks about. It is socialists who were at the heart of International Women's Day. Socialists who were at the heart of bringing women to government in the first time ever, or giving women free vote or the right to divorce, all those kinds of things in Russia in 1917 and so on and so forth. It is even different kinds of socialists, radical nationalists who call themselves socialists, like of the Kwame Nkrumah type, who would have organized in 1960 here in Accra, a first World Congress of Black women of Africa and the diaspora. Fine, it was a state, top-down thing and so, but the fact is that they would have thought about it in a way in which the non-socialists would never even think about it, or rather and so on. And that's why today, when you look at the fact that the way in which our economy is, the intensification of profits by our ruling class has to depend on two things. One, it has to depend on increasingly privatizing, either formally or informally, directly or indirectly, privatizing natural resources. But we are an agricultural society, a natural resource-based society. If you are privatizing natural resources, as we see with Galamsey, as we see with privatizing the flow of natural resource export earnings like the Japa deal, as we see with the ACA deal in GMPC, once you are privatizing natural resources, it means that some people's capacity to survive independently on those natural resources is radically diminished, or actually is appropriated altogether. They are dispossessed of that capacity. So you are throwing more and more cheap labor, and that same cheap labor will be the ones who work in the natural resource sector. To be able to do that, you require tradition. You require things to say custom. I'm the chief, I'm the tribe. You reenact all those unquestioned authorities and you give it a long history as if it can never change, and this is our essential identity, and so on and so forth. And you insist on going back to traditional family values. That's what, for example, the LGBT bill, that's what it purports to do. Traditional family values in the context of what we are saying now means that you are forcing women back in a position where there is this increasing intensification of exploitation and inequality and an increasing reliance on cheap labor in a way that has never happened since independence. Because at least in the 1960s, if you wanted to industrialize, you need to pay the workforce a certain, so that they can be the market for the same import substitution industrial goods that you are producing. That is not the strategy now. It is a totally different strategy. And to rely on all these traditions requires you to rely on religion. It requires you to rely on ethnic. The ruling class itself cobbles its own unity along those lines. So the fractures are immense. The divisions in our side are immense. The disempowerment, the single issues, everybody, I'm an environmentalist, I'm a feminist, are immense. Okay, fine, all those are necessary. But the unifying point has to be this systemic anti-capitalist critique, which is able to marry both oppression and exploitation. Find the interconnection between the two. That is the contribution that socialists can make. And I think that socialists can make that opportunity and give women, aid women to stand up in their own self-emancipation in a way that no other political present can do. And that's the point that is critical here. It's only on that basis that I can be confident about the socialist future that Ekwa was asking about. But I'm more content to focus on what socialists can do in the here and now to attack this system, to open the doors for the reversals of oppression where it is possible, because we know that in different parts of the world, since the 1960s, the women's movement and Black civil rights, some things can change. Some places they have LGBT, some things can change. It will not change the system as a whole, but it tells us that if we can win, we can go further and win some more. That is the contribution that socialists have to make today. If you are sitting in a place, in your workplace, and your male colleagues passes this about some woman's backside or puts up some picture, you have to challenge them. You have to show why it is not in their interest to be perpetrating these things. It's not simply at the level of the ideas, it's also about the material interest. The capacity to combine the two, I think, is the richness that socialists bring to the table. And in fact, in addition to having that analysis, it is also the capacity to act that is based on it. So for example, after this, it ought to be important that we also issue our statement and we also make some demands and add up to that process. But I think that the more we are, the better we are. So let me take advantage and also ask that for all of you who are not members of the Socialist Students and Workers Network and the International Socialist Organization, please think very clearly about joining. Or in fact, if you agree, only 90% or 80% of what we said, join right here today and now. Sorry to carry on so much. I know I haven't answered your full question. I hope I'm on the way to doing that, and I'm quite happy for us to continue the discussion afterwards as well. So more contributions. Sorry for taking. I'm sure I broke my 3-minute rule, but that's what personal power does. Let me read a couple of things from the chat as well. Bash says, how else can we guarantee the protection of women beyond legislation and fractured institutions? Since not obviously helping Mark. And Oliver says, is the overthrow of patriarchy political project we are all truly committed to? Those are also very good questions as well. I hope some of the discussions so far have begun to partially start addressing them as well. Who is next to speak, please? Davis, is that you? You want to talk? Comments, please, let's, or if there's a lull, then let me call Amanda and Jifa back to perhaps, respond to some of the issues that have come up so far. And in addition to Ekwea's posting in the chat, which is to do with the fact that, okay, let me give the floor to Adote before I ask the speakers back. Adote, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Comrade, and thanks to the two speakers. This is a quick contribution that I want to make. I made an observation which I would like to share with all of you here. In this country, whenever there is this massive attack on the minority groups, such as the LGBT group, then automatically what you expect next to happen is the rise in the killing of women. Of course, the killing of women is going on, but then when there's a rise in the killing of women, then what you should know is that it was preceded by, an attack on the minority groups in the country, especially the LGBT plus group. So this, to me, explains the situation very clearly, very well. All forms of oppressions are linked, and we have to be very critical about that and pay attention to it. Now, the only way we can protect our women for now, immediately, is to rise up against all forms of oppression, especially the oppression of minority groups in the country that we live in. If we allow that to happen, where people who represent division in the society, like the religious group, especially religious leaders, who represent division in the society, are allowed to use their platform to oppress minority groups or invite hate against minority groups, then what is bound to happen immediately afterwards is the attack on women, the killing of women. And this has been happening over and over again. So if some of you here have not been paying attention to it, you should start paying attention to it. The attack of minority groups. Then what you should expect next is the rise in the killing of women. Of course, if there's rise in the killing of women, we should also know that there's rise in the attack. Domestic violence, especially against women. There's a rise. There's a rise in the domestic violence against women. But of course, we don't have a system that can tell us or explain to us what is happening or give us the figures for us to relate to. But it's for sure to happen if there's rise in the killing of women. So once again, what I think we should do as a revolutionary socialists or people who want to stand up who are human.
Sorry, Adote, can you unmute and come back? Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Let me summarize. What I'm saying is that whenever there is a rise in the attack against minority groups in the country that we live in, then what we should expect is the rise in attack against women, and that leads to the killing of women. It's been happening for many years now. So the only way we can protect our women immediately is to stand up against all forms of attacks against minority groups. Because if we let go of the attack against minority groups, then what's going to happen is that women will start dying. So it's up to us to stand up against it. And also, we shouldn't allow a system where people who represent division among the society thrive. And here I'm talking about our pastors, our imams, or our so-called, our chiefs also. If you allow them to become so powerful, and they become so powerful in the society that we live in, and of course, if they become so powerful, they automatically we are going to, experience, the worst form of oppression in the society we live in. So this is my contribution. We should all stand up against oppression, all forms of oppression. If we really want to protect or secure our women, we should all stand up against all forms of oppression, because all forms of oppressions are linked. Thank you.
Thanks, Adote. If there's no one else ready yet, let me ask Amanda and Jifa to come back on some of what they've heard, but also some of what is in the chat. There are a number of things about going beyond how can we guarantee improvements and protection for women beyond legislation and the kind of fractured, unaccountable, unresponsive institutions that currently exist. How do we make the overthrow of patriarchy a political project that we all share in? And also, of course, Ekwea's question about the role and contribution of socialism and socialists to this long-standing problem that predates the capitalism that we're all fighting today. So I'm going to ask you back in the order that you spoke, Amanda first, and then also after that, Jifa, and maybe you can take roughly 3 or 4 minutes each so that we can come back for maybe a final round of comments and so on as well. So Amanda, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I think you spoke at length about how the system and the structures work. I think I would start from how to address these issues beyond legislation. I think in our presentations, we have raised issues about masculinity. Personally, I feel a lot of our messaging had mostly focused on women and what we need to do for women to be emancipated and be free. And then we left out a key factor, and then the key player in all these issues of gender-based violence, which has been the male figure, and then the messaging and the structures around which they operate, and which gives room for men to be able to continue and making their actions permissible. So we have to move our messaging beyond what women can't do by themselves to make sure that they overcome the structures, to look at the people responsible for these and how we can work on them and let them be able to change the system and the status quo itself. It fits into how do we make sure that overthrowing the patriarchal structure. One thing we've realized in gender-based violence studies is the fact that when men take over the space to advocate, to lead advocacy, or to own up to some of their responsibilities, it helps. So how do we get men involved now? How do we get men to understand? How do we get them to know that their privileged position in society has consequences? That's why we talk about toxic masculinity, amongst others. How do we also make sure that they understand that women are equal citizens? We have equal rights, and we do have the same space to operate and move on. We talk about culture, we talk about religion. All these things are based on discourses, messages. What are the messages we have in there? How are we going to change them and make sure that they represent views that accommodate women and women's position and place, and that violence is not something that is permissible? Then it leads me to Professor Brisham's question, what will be different under socialism? Then how do we make sure that we dismantle patriarchy so that femicide disappears? I also would like to approach it from the same argument. What is it? How do we see women and men? We have to break that binary extreme ends that this is where women belong, this is where men belong, and see women and men as equal members of society who can contribute as citizens who have the same space. And how do we do that? Who are those who have, we look at those who have powers. What is it that we have told them? How can we get them to come around to engage them equally? And how do we make sure that we tackle, just like those who responded, tackle these forms of structures equally, not looking at just patriarchy alone, not looking at just economic structures, but how to address all of them in tandem to make sure that these issues do not come back again. So I think that would be my point.
Hi, Jifa.
Okay.
Hello. Okay. So mine, briefly, I will take it from where Adote left, since Amanda has tackled many of the questions. The issue about looking at all forms of oppression brings me to think about what people even think is oppression. what do people think is oppression, and how do they see the different kinds of oppression? So that's my first point. So I've been thinking about this because in the recent times when this issue about hair, the hair of the Rastafarian students came up, then I read something that talked about why, for instance, in Ghana, a Black country, girls are not allowed to, or school children, particularly girls, are not allowed to grow hair a certain way. And then I read that actually a politician at the time who decided that, a female politician, who decided that the girls should keep it short so that they will not attract, they will not be a center of attraction for men. So they should be that basic, and so which defies all the logics about creativity, the school as a place for diversity and all sorts of expressions. So we can see that how individuals that hold powers, as Amanda has already said, have tried to codify the way we ought to live. And then we are all fighting about that, and we are not questioning why this is so. So the issue about this family value law, whatever it is, for instance, is talking about tells all of us, that is, if you are not critiquing it very well, tells all of us that we should our humanity, your humanity, to help someone who is in need, for instance, is going to be punished, which is the biggest onslaught of assault on you as a human being, your dignity, your humanity. And that's how we should also see this thing about oppression. So for instance, when I ask this question about what do people think is oppression, do people think that police harassing commercial sex workers is oppression? And that is linked to oppression of women and the general framework of putting women down, and women, the hierarchy that women hold in society. And why is that not a point for us to also, why is it not at the center of the discussion? For instance, because this one happens every time, harassing them, parading them, and that's women's body. And then they are in the media and nobody says anything. Why is it that we are not going to talk about harassment, sexual harassment at workplaces, at high places, at the high parts of the society, and it's discussed as very normal. It's normalized. Why is that we don't think about that? So I think that before people can appreciate what is really oppression and how the kinds of oppression are also linked to women's oppression, and then also things about liberation of women, people have to systematically think about why these kinds of things happen in society matter for us to even think that these are oppression. For instance, why should we be worried about oppression of people from a certain ethnic group? For instance, why shouldn't you be worried? And so I'll go with the thing about unifying the struggles so that we don't get it fragmented. But before people can join a struggle that they think is worth struggle, they have to understand the roots, and that's very very fundamental to what how they are going to go about arguing for or equality and all that. So for instance, there are people who think that, oh, women, they've got everything already. They are so empowered. So what do they still want? But then we look at that is very tokenistic anyway, for people to even think that way, because women are still very, very, very poor. In a recent study by the World Bank, for instance, that I've been looking at 2011, 2021, COVID effects, more women lost their jobs in Ghana than men, for instance. And that's more women in urban Ghana lost their job than men. So why? What kind of work are they doing, for instance, for them to lose their jobs? And how would that lead to that kind of structure lead to their oppression, for instance? So for instance, when we are talking about women being, people talk loosely that women are materialistic, women are this, women are, all the kinds of words that people use to describe women. And all this is linked to even popular rulings about property rights. And why does she want? What did she contribute to this property and all that? Then people now begin to justify why a certain kind of crime befalls a woman. So I think that we have to carry this argument forward and then discuss with them a broader frame of people's understanding what's oppression. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to mute you now, and then Bash, you have the floor.
Hello, Bazini, can you hear me?
Loud and very clear.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I have a problem with my network. So thank you so much, Jifa and Amanda, and also to Prof for this country, because like Jifa just mentioned, I think that policymakers themselves are not committed in responding to issues related to any form of sexual and gender-based violence in this country.
Hey, Bash, you think whatever you feared has come to pass?
Because for the years, last year, since we recorded our cases of COVID in March, our president gave over 20 different speeches that we all that fellow Ghanaians. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, Bash, go on. You break sometimes, but so if you can round up, your is not very stable. So yeah.
Okay, so my issue is that even in the times of COVID from last year, when we had serious issues of gender-based violence, our president in his over 20 different speeches never mentioned anything to do with sexual and gender-based violence. When countries in Africa, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Nigeria were declaring state of emergency on same, you know, so it goes a long way to tell us how the systems and those who are in the positions of power to change everything we are going through are the ones who are actually making it happen. You know, to the meeting, and I had a face-off with the chief director of a ministry who outrightly just linked HIV and AIDS is just spread by work in this country. You know, so you can imagine the level of, you know, the level of unwillingness in terms of you can have the laws, you can have the institution, but even the resources that are supposed to be allocated to these ministries or departments or DOFSU, the security services, for them to be able to better protect citizens are not there. So you have a ministry of gender that is getting other ministries, and for the work that they do and the quantum of responsibility that they have, is that supposed to be what it is? But issues around sexual and gender-based violence and all issues around femicide is this ministry. So we only wait every single time to expect someone, donors and other groups, to come and donate to the ministry, you know, before we are able to respond to these issues. And finally, one key thing that I would like to mention in all of this, because most of the killings we've recorded are intimate partner. We do not even have shelters to boast of in the first place. So if a woman decides to run from the abuser, where does she go to? You know, she's forced to stay because one, she does not have that economic standing enough to get her out and be independent. She does not even know which shelter to go to in the first place. So it becomes a whole issue of dependency over and over again to a system and an individual who has even said there's a big country, it's a big issue, and I don't know how we can deal with this issue again, because the government of Ghana converted a shelter in Upper East that was donated by ActionAid Ghana to an isolation center in the time of COVID. Does it mean that we are not that sensitive enough to recognize that there might be people who might be in need of shelter when they are trying to get free from their abusers in this country? Thank you.
Thank you, Bash. Unfortunately, we missed some of what you said, but I think the general gist came through. So any other contributions? Well, let's have a last round of a couple of questions and answers, and then, sorry, a couple of questions and comments, and then we can call back our speakers to sum up and wrap up the meeting. I have put the contact details of the Socialist Students and Workers Network and ISO Ghana in the chat. I encourage everybody to leave your contacts so that we can, get in touch, work together. And I also encourage all of you who agree with most of what we're saying so far to join our organization so we're stronger and are better able to intervene on these questions. We have a lot more human capacity. Our ideas thrive because we have a vibrant community of membership, and our capacity to act, our capacity to be effective activists strategically according to whatever spaces that we can intervene in is also enhanced. So please, I think we need you, but believe me, you also need to be in organizations, and you can't do two worse than start from here. So yeah, George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Comrade. I think going forward, we have to see the media as a very cardinal partner in this discourse, because this issue have to be pushed to the point where it is not anymore what did the lady do, but it becomes, should this thing continue? We have to make it a kind of a political issue, so that the way the media itself is able to articulate it is not just talking about this Kennedy who today is being violated, but you can link the chain, 25 victims back to this case. What has happened? There should be investigative journalism on this kind of an issue that will follow up a case. It is good to report that a lady has been violated today, but it is important to follow up to the very logical conclusion, what has happened to this case of this lady after she was violated. And when we can link it to what happened 3, 4, 5 years ago, 10, 15 other persons, I'm sure it will come to the floor where it becomes a political issue, that politicians can no longer dodge it. And at the time of elections, these things can come to bear. Thank you, comrades.
Thanks, George. It also means socialists must also develop their own media, their own writing, their own resources as well. Any other comments, contributions? We still have roughly 20 minutes to go. Fatah, you want to say something? Well, there seems to be dead silence in this matter. I don't know whether it would be right for me to speak again, but I wanted to address this question of culture that a couple of people have raised a number of times. I mean, I'll keep quiet. If I get the go ahead, I will. But yeah.
Oh, Deji, please go
on. Yeah. Really? Okay.
I think since we don't have anybody talking now, you can go on, please.
Okay. Yeah, I think Faisal made the important point that culture is also about power, but it's also about material circumstances. So for example, that is why a lot of people, when they look at, let's say, what so-called second wave feminism achieved in places like the Western world, in the 1960s. Well, first of all, rebuilding all those economies in Western Europe after the Second World War, after the level of destruction that took place, meant that there had to be full employment. Women did not go back to the home as had happened after the First World War. Women became employed outside the home en masse for the first time and permanently. That's the first thing. Second thing is that recovery required greater industrial competition and innovation among the leading capitalist powers. So higher education became a requirement even for the capitalists themselves. True, they do not want to pay for it, but they got the state to pay for it. So women also entered higher education, in droves. It is in those circumstances that home kind appliances, markets for home appliances like washing machines, ironing, electric cooker, dishwasher, and also contraceptions became widely available on the market. In other words, women were needed to work, and they were needed to go to school. So yes, by all means, we are still going to judge you by your family role, by whether you are married, whether you have children, and so on. Still, you couldn't open a bank account without your husband. Still, you couldn't own certain types of property. But the structure of the other structure of the society changed. Women also position changed, relatively speaking, and their capacity to demand their own rights and so on was greatly enhanced, especially in a period when the same full employment meant stronger trade unions, and the same period coincided with the anti-colonial struggles, the struggle for Black civil rights and so on and so forth, the Vietnam War, and of course, gay liberation also came on the scene and so on. So, which goes to affirm the point that Jifa and Adote made previously about the interconnections between different struggles against oppression. But I'm saying that the material basis for that was still predicated on the structure of the economy and of employment that had evolved or was emerging, and in relation to that, this sudden explosion of higher education opportunities for women and for young people generally. So you had all this culture shock, basically, everything up in the air, all kinds of questions, philosophy changed, universities changed, all kinds of things. Now, if you come to Africa, that isn't quite the picture that you get. So a lot of people can't quite see, and that's why feminist contribution about this insistence and uncovering and elaboration of this question of unpaid labor is so critical to being able to piece together a systemic sense of this question. Because without that, women who are working on some half-acre farm somewhere and selling 3 tomatoes on the table, you can't quite see where their liberation is going to come from, except and until you understand that it is the fact that they perform unpaid labor in a variety of different locales and locations, a variety of different channels of livelihood strategies and homemaking that connects them to the wider system as a whole and the wider sections, some of the most powerful and strategic centers of unpaid labor that takes place within the economy and so on. And that's why you can talk in terms of class in that broader sense. And that class cannot act as a class unless the radical equality of women is central to that class. You can't. It's as simple. So culture is important from that point of view. But in our understanding, let's also understand that sometimes we don't take capitalism as a global system, what it means, seriously enough. If you take it as a global system seriously enough, you would be open to the idea and you'll be open to the investigation that the forms of economic activity that we have here that do not look capitalist at all actually are structured by capitalism. So take peasant economies. Until the 19th century, you did not have a whole range of households in Africa producing commodities for a market, even food, let alone cash crops and so on and so forth. So this is a deliberate, and it's a deliberate which came as a result of the population in Africa, which itself had been heavily depopulated as a result of another earlier feature of capitalism, which is the slave trade, the modern, Atlantic slave trade. And that Atlantic slave trade is what created that peasant economy and so on and so forth. It created another aspect about women and women's equality. And I'm going to end on this point. If you take the fact that thousands and tens of thousands of people were taken day in, day out, year in, year out for 400 years, you can't but come to one conclusion. That is that compared to the rest of the world, every other region in the world, Africa was severely underpopulated by the time of colonialism in the 19th century. Severe, which is around the early 19th century is when the formal end of slavery ended anyway. Severely underpopulated. That severe underpopulation also had some internal effects. One was that, yes, it is true that the local ruling classes and so became, those who could participate in the slave trade became very powerful, very well, like Overlord of Dagbon, Asantini, all those ridiculous, ridiculous given the history of where they came from. That is where the power comes from. So for them, oppression is central. But they never were able to develop the kind of economy where you produce surplus value for them automatically. So Jeff Bezos, the boss of Amazon, he can sit on a public bus, sit on a public train. Nobody will notice him. He may not notice anybody. Because whether you like it or not, you have to turn up tomorrow morning and work at Amazon and make his profit for it. Here, because of both the slave trade and the way in which people have underpopulation and they have access to land and so on and so forth, personal authority, compelling somebody to be subordinate to you personally is important. So personal authority and impressing yourself upon somebody personally. I will show you where power lies. I gave him 2 slaps. They won't even say 2 slaps. They will go further and say 2 dirty slaps. There's almost a need to deepen and elaborate the way in which individuals are suppressed by this thing. But there too comes the question of gender. Because in this process of course, women were sold as slaves just as men. Sexual violence became prevalent, so prevalent during the slave trade period. Because just like then as now, it was a mechanism for cowing people who had not been enslaved before, who didn't give up to be enslaved so easily, and so on and so forth. But also think about the population ratio. In West Africa, for almost 300 years, between 300 and 400 years, the population of male to female was 0.6 to 1. For every 10 women, you had only 6 men. It is in that period that polygamy became central in West Africa. It didn't exist on any widespread before then. It is in that period that polygamy became central. And if you take the present household economy that I'm talking about, it continued to make sense and continued to yield this as the household became a mechanism for yielding unpaid labor without the trouble of having to dragoon people who already had access to land and so on and so forth. You couldn't do the enclosures that you had and the concentration of property and so on and so forth. The way it's happening today, you couldn't have done that. So a lot of the culture that we have about the suppression of women and personal violence and so on and so forth, that culture has material roots. So as long as you understand that the challenging the material mechanisms of unpaid labor is central to this fight, then you can see your way out of this impasse. Then it no longer becomes some foreign thing. Otherwise, if it's culture, somebody will say, why are you promoting LGBT rights and you are not promoting polygamy? But the issue about polygamy is between local men and local women. It's nothing to do with some people elsewhere. Culture can always give you the excuse not to interrogate your own fault lines. Culture can always make you externalize the problem, push it somewhere else, and so on and so forth. So in the same way as there's oppressive culture, there's also cultures of emancipation and so on and so forth. The point about socialism and what we can do in an understanding where oppressive culture comes from, part of that is because we are interested in, we depend on, and we need to enact liberatory and emancipatory cultures as well. And that is why we are so interested in the way in which society develops, the forms that it takes, and so on and so forth, the actual material conditions themselves, and the ideas that are used to justify the social power that exists, the economic exploitation that takes place, the divisions that are maintained, which are the basis of political domination in a variety of different forms. So no one should take culture as a finished product. Whoever does that is being hoodwinked, or is himself, more likely than not, a petty beneficiary of those oppressive cultures as well. There are material roots. We can fight both on the question of culture, ideas, but also on the material questions of exploitation and oppression as well. Mark Agbo. Mark, you have the floor. Sorry, is Mark there? Okay, his hand was up.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, please. Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to add to this and take it from where you ended. Yeah, culture. We have to acknowledge the fact that for some time now, or the role of culture has changed in many ways, or maybe it has become dynamic as the world changes. You cannot always rely on the fact that, let's say, the people championing this thing, say, use culture as a focal point. Culture has changed over time, and then if we would want to use culture to explain some of these issues, then we shouldn't have even gotten this far, because if things have changed, then we shouldn't be faced with such a problem. The reason I'm saying this is, so far as society is changing, then we should be moving from the old ways of doing things, where we keep pinning women to the floor and then liberating women to be not to say at par, but we should almost all be enjoying some kind of equality. I hope my point has been understood to this point. Then I can build up on my point. Do we get it to this point?
Yeah, we're listening.
Yeah. So
then don't worry, go ahead, man.
Yeah. So if we
but you have to round up soon. Sorry, Mark, you have to round up soon.
Okay. So what I want to say is, and then even based on the population issue, you mentioned something like that. Women are more than men. But then when you want people to champion this thing, we should be having women in the forefront. Now, I know some women have taken the lead to champion this thing. Where are the other women who are supposed to hold on to this? We normally find them at the background. You don't even find a lot of women coming together to champion some of these things. And then we go, we champion this to a point, we leave it, and then we bring another thing, and then we champion to a point, we leave it. It means that the things that we champion, it keeps hanging at a point and it never gets ended. And then you bring another thing. When you keep doing it this way, we will never get to a point where we will have a success in this. We will have to see more women come together and then push for some of these things to be successful.
Sorry, Mark, can you unmute and finish? Are you there, Mark?
Yeah, so okay, it's fine, yeah.
Oh, you feel, okay, all right, okay. Okay, comment, it's 10 to 6 now, so I will call, unless there's somebody dying to speak, and if they don't speak, they'll resign from the socialist organization. Unless there's someone like that, and I doubt that we have such dramatic, melodramatic members. So unless there's someone like that, that's not a very burning question, then I'll ask our 2 speakers to come back and take maybe 4 or 5 minutes each to make their final comments, and then we can wrap up the meeting. So Amanda, over to you.
Sorry. Okay, thank you very much, Chechi. I think I would wrap up by saying that addressing this issue it requires a comprehensive approach. It is not an individual female, an individual male situation. It is not just calling for women to lead or relying just on the media, and that we need interrelated approaches where all institutions come on board or individuals come on board. We've mentioned culture a lot. And when we talk about culture, we're just looking at the customs and behavior of a people, of a place. And so what is our culture around women, around women's place in society, what can be done to them and what cannot be done to them? How do we come to know this? These things have lingered on because of the messaging, the language, the norms, the practices that we've had concerning women and women's place and what we can do to them. So it's time that we change the language around women's violence, women's oppression. It's because the internalization of these messages is one of the key reasons why it's happening. And it is the reasons why the institutional responses we are even requiring are not working, because there's a reason why the shelters don't even exist for women who are going through this. Because if you're a woman, you have to stay in this abusive relationship. Why do you go? Your honor, your importance, or your very existence in society and identity is wrapped around this relationship. So why do you want to leave it? It is the reason why the government can decide to turn a structure that even exists into that of another thing, because then this is not an important situation. It's not as important as whatever is happening that we need to make a change. It is also the reasons why these persons in charge of addressing this situation do not respond. They are members of society and they hear these messages. So you go to the police station, and instead of the police asking what happened, how did it happen, the first thing they ask you is, what did you do wrong? What did you do before he did this to you? And it is also the reason why even individual men that do not want to be violent cannot afford to, because then they'll be mocked, because they'll be asked to live up to the toxic expectation. When your wife misbehaves, beat her, you don't walk away, you correct her. And it's also the reason why pastors will say stay. Your parents will even say stay. Even to the point of death, our parents are asking us to stay in this relationship. So if we're able to change the messaging around what is a woman's place and what she should take and should not, then it will be helpful. And then it will call on everybody to be able to be a part of it. This is not just a women's led situation, because if women get up and say that is a women's fight, so we are fighting it alone, then it's also going to defeat the purpose for which we want a solution. Then we say, okay, the women are here again. But then if everybody gets involved, if all men, women, if religious institutions, if all the structures that matter come to board, then we're going to know that, okay, this is a serious issue that requires a comprehensive way of addressing it. What happens is that when you when we are quiet, the swift response that we require that is not happening right now is also leading to the same thing that issues I have raised so far. Right currently, what are the outcomes of the cases that have been reported? Do we know? How do we know? The media has taken it up. What is the police doing about it? What is the ministry doing about it? What is the president, as Bash mentioned, what's the president doing about it? And then if we are quiet and silent around these things, then it says that, okay, it's permissible to continue doing that. It means that we are not ready to punish femicide, violence against women and these forms of femicide. And this becomes a breeding ground for it to continue, because when you do it, what will happen? Nothing. People will just step in and raise issues as to why how you got offended and why you couldn't let it happen. And then the only form of emotion that we expect men to address, I'm looking at men as a group and not as individual, is emotions of violence, anger. What are we going to do to reverse these things such that we don't even permit them to happen? I think when we look at these things around the issues that are happening this way, then we can come across as a people ready to fight this and ready to stop this femicide and all other forms of oppression against women in society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Jifai, if I may ask you back.
Yes, thank you. So briefly, I will end on the notes about socialization of services, and I've been following these stories about school feeding, for instance, and I've been telling people that this is the way these feeding programs are part of the state's contribution to care and social provisioning, and that we should look at those as things that can lift the burden of social reproduction and then social provisioning on women. So if they are in crisis, then we are in a bigger crisis, and women should be interested in this. This is not only an education issue. It's all linked up to women's role in society, their oppression, the role they play in the family, and the fact that if the man is broke, the woman is the one that will have to carry that burden. Even if the man is not broke and he decide not to give anything out, that's it. The woman, the woman still have to take that responsibility. So they say that children they hold their mother's breast to say they're hungry and not their father's testicles, and we should look at that. So when the state shakes its responsibility in terms of social provision, social reproduction, in terms of the daycares, that the kindergartens that the state builds in public schools, the resources of that, the food that the children eat in the school feeding program, both the secondary school, the primary school, they are all the part of the state's contribution. And we have seen that defunding of these areas where things that can help the family is one of the key issues that we should also be worried about. That why is it that it's in the budgeting for some programs that affect the family, and especially for women, benefit from this social program? Why is that these are the areas that have less funding and are even defunded compared to let's say arms, the budget to the military, for instance? So we have to be interested in this. We should be interested in this and take some of these things forward, because we are in a very dire situation, and the crisis of the care crisis at home, and that's also translates into a care crisis in the school, which the state itself has to take on, but the state's responsibility is not going far enough, will have implications for how women are treated in society. That is not to endorse what is happening, but to say that that part is also very important. And of course, of the bigger framework of social provisioning of universal basic access to basic services, health, and many others. It's very, very important for us to think about these things as we also think about the forms of oppression and how we can deal with it, and also to continue the debate, to continue the discussion as women, as socialists, as human rights activists, and to carry this message forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jifa, and thank you to Amanda and also to everybody who has participated in this meeting. We're very grateful. Obviously, this is an important discussion, and it's a discussion which must continue. As others have said, in relation to the media, in relation to our need to educate ourselves and take our education outreach into the communities that we are located on the campuses, at work, at home, and in our communities, and so on and so forth. I think that there's a lot that we can do. The first thing to say, of course, is that you know, the whole tradition, the best of the traditions of feminism and of women's liberation have constituted a counterculture. It's not simply about culture. It is the resistance, the emancipatory resistance to that culture that grounds what you know, the achievements that you know, have been made, and also grounds the possibilities of going beyond beyond those as well. That's something that I think socialists and feminists share, and I think that you know, you can't really be a socialist today and call yourself worthy of the liberation of humanity as a whole, the majority of humanity as a whole, if you do not take up the question of women's liberation front and center of whatever agenda that we undertake. So socialists definitely need the best of feminism as well. But I would dare say that feminists need socialism as well, because the issues that emanate, for example, if it is today, say the public sector pay crisis, for example, that is going on, when we know that perhaps the strategically most important concentration of women in employment, in full-time wage employment, is in areas such as public education and public health and so on and so forth. Throughout this period of COVID, this is what we have seen and so on. But at the same time, you know, you don't find feminists, you don't find the women's movement coming to it. If we are to have an effective counterculture, which generates fresh ideas, exciting ideas, compelling narratives, important analysis, but at the same time arms people, most importantly, to intervene as activists and make a difference, then we need to revive. I mean, I know net-right and all those things exist, but frankly, we need to rebuild the women's movement as well. A women's movement which worries about individuals' religious beliefs and therefore will not take up the question of, you know, abortion and social. I don't think you are dealing, because the heart of the question for women is that social reproduction function emanating from their biological capacity to reproduce. And unless women have control over that, and unless the way in which they can gain that control incrementally, and the ideas that furnish that, even in religions, progressive religions have found their way to embracing these questions and reinterpreting their religious views and their practices along those lines. I think we need to actually go back to that kind of thing. That's something that socialists can be proud of taking a part of and can contribute to. And as I said, socialists should make it a point to ensure that women are in the forefront of everything they do. That means we want more and more women to join us. So please join us. But that also means socialists should have the full openness to be engaged on these questions, learn from feminists, learn from women activists, make common cause with them, and fight in the here and now to lessen the burden and remove the scourge of violence and the threat that people are immediately confronted with, but also to do so in anticipation of building a better basis for challenging the system as a whole and bringing about the day that not only women, but all working people and humanity as a whole can be liberated and live, you know, in much better circumstances than we are forced to do so today. So thank you very much, comrades. I think that having listened to our two speakers, it's incumbent on the ISO to take a stand, a coherent public stand on some of the issues that are taking place right now in terms of the femicide and so on, and to become involved in organizations and networks such as net-right, and to become involved in pushing for new agendas and new horizons for the women's movement as a whole. We may not be popular for doing so, but it is necessary that we do so. In the same way, we hope that women, feminists, will join us and transform our organization and what we do as well. And I hope that today is but a starting point in those twin and conjoined parallel, but also parallel processes as well. So comrades, I thank you all. I thank Amanda especially, and also Jifa, and all of you who have taken part, those who asked questions, those who raised comments in the chat, and so on and so forth. And comrades, as I said, I put the address of the ISO and SSWN in the chat. Please get in touch. Let's work together. We have a whole world to conquer, and let's begin to do so with the small steps that we can take today. Thank you, and have a good evening, everybody. Jifa, thanks. Amanda.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.